Pain in love is not a punishment. It is an invitation to know yourself more deeply. When someone you trusted walks away, or when love dissolves into silence, your first impulse is to believe that life has been unfair to you. You feel targeted, singled out, almost as if existence is punishing you for loving sincerely. But if you look beneath the surface of your pain, if you sit quietly with the trembling of your own heart, you will begin to see that this pain is not here to destroy you. It is here to introduce you to aspects of yourself you have never truly met. When love arrives, it is easy to get lost in the warmth of another's presence. You begin to see yourself through their eyes, measure your worth by their affection, and build your inner stability on their approval. As long as the connection remains smooth, you feel whole. But this wholeness is not real. It depends on something outside of you. When the relationship shifts, when expectations collapse, when the other person no longer mirrors back the image you held, the illusion crumbles. What hurts is not the loss of love, but the loss of the identity you had woven around that love. The pain you feel is actually the dismantling of your false self. Pain in love does not come to punish your heart. It comes to reveal its depth. It forces you to question where your sense of completeness truly comes from. When the outer support is gone, you are pushed back into your own center. For the first time, you may hear the faint echoes of your real needs, your real wounds, your real longings. Perhaps you had been using love as a distraction from your inner emptiness. Perhaps your affection was mixed with dependence, fear, or unresolved past hurts. The breaking of the relationship exposes all of this. It tears open the layers you had neatly hidden. And instead of seeing this as cruelty, you can see it as life's attempt to bring you closer to yourself. When love hurts, you're confronted with your own inner landscape, your fears, insecurities, desires, and forgotten dreams. You begin to notice the spaces in you that were waiting to be acknowledged. Pain highlights the places that need healing. It shines a light on the expectations you had placed on the other person. Expectations that even you couldn't fully articulate. Shows you the ways in which you had abandoned yourself by searching for validation outside. In that sense, heartbreak becomes a mirror that reflects truths you might have ignored for years. If you allow the pain to speak, it will tell you that you were living too far from your own essence. You were depending too much on the presence of another to feel alive. The hurt gently, or sometimes sharply, nudges you back. It invites you to rediscover your ability to stand on your own feet emotionally, to reconnect with your inner silence, to listen to the pulse of your own being. The more you embrace this invitation, the more you begin to see that the pain is not against you. It is for you. It is not a judgment. It is guidance. Pain in love becomes a doorway. When you walk through it consciously, it leads you to a deeper, steadier relationship with yourself. And when you truly know yourself, when you are no longer fragmented inside, love ceases to hurt. It becomes a celebration instead of a dependency, an overflow instead of a search. Heartbreak destroys illusions, not your capacity to love. When a relationship ends or love takes a painful turn, it often feels as though something essential within you has been shattered forever. You start believing that your ability to trust, to feel tenderness, to open your heart again has been taken away. But look closer. What truly breaks inside you is not love itself, but the dreams, projections, and expectations you had woven around another person. The heart is never damaged by loving. It is damaged by misunderstanding what love is. What dies in heartbreak is the fantasy, the imagined story you created, the identity you built around the idea of us. Once the illusion dissolves, what remains is something far more real, more grounded, more authentic. When you fall in love, you inevitably create images. You imagine who the other person is, who you are with them, how the future will unfold. Love becomes a stage, and both of you become actors in a script that was never truly discussed. In the glow of affection, you forget that people change, circumstances shift, and no one can perfectly match the picture in your mind. Heartbreak occurs the moment reality no longer fits the story. The person leaves, withdraws, or acts differently, and suddenly the castle made of hopes and expectations collapses. The pain you feel is the sound of those illusions crumbling. The deeper the illusion, the sharper the pain. But even in the midst of that collapse, notice one thing: the tenderness within you, the longing for connection, the capacity to feel deeply. These do not disappear. They only retreat for a moment, like a flower closing when the night becomes too cold. Love itself is untouched. It is the layers of misunderstanding around love that fall away. What heartbreak really destroys is your dependency on someone else to complete you. The belief that your happiness is tied to their presence. The idea that love must look a certain way to be real. These beliefs are painful to lose, but their loss is a form of liberation. Heartbreak invites you to see people as they are, not as your mind imagined them to be. It invites you to see yourself as you are, stripped of pretenses and fantasies. You come face to face with your vulnerability, your desires, your insecurities. This confrontation may feel harsh, but it is cleansing, purifying. It clears the fog that prevented you from seeing love clearly. After the illusion breaks, a new clarity begins to arise. You realize that love cannot be possessed, controlled, or guaranteed. You realize that no one can fulfill every part of you, and that expecting them to do so only leads to disappointment. What you call heartbreak is actually a correction. It realigns you with reality. It returns you to yourself. And if you allow it, it deepens your understanding of what love truly means. Real love is spacious, not restrictive. It is alive, not fixed. It thrives on freedom, not expectation. Once the illusions fall away, you are left with a more mature heart, one that can love without clinging, one that can give without bargaining, one that can appreciate without demanding permanence. So after the storm passes, you discover something surprising. Your capacity to love has not been weakened, it has been refined. You become more honest, more present, more aware. Heartbreak does not close your heart. It prepares it. It does not take love from you. It clears the path for a love that is more real than anything your illusions had promised. Love becomes suffering only when we cling, expect, and possess. In its purest form, love is a movement of freedom, a natural flow of energy between two beings. It does not bind, it does not demand, it does not insist on a particular outcome. It simply is. But as soon as the mind enters with its fears, insecurities, and desires, love begins to change its shape. It becomes something we try to control, something we hold on to as if it were a fragile object that might slip from our hands. And the moment love is clutched, it loses its fragrance. The suffering begins not because love is painful, but because our attachment distorts its essence. Clinging comes from a deep inner emptiness. When you do not feel whole within yourself, you turn the other person into a source of your completeness. You cling to them not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of losing what you believe you cannot live without. In this clinging, you stop seeing the person as they are and start seeing them as your emotional lifeline. You suffocate them with your need and at the same time suffocate yourself, because now your joy depends on their every action, mood, and decision. Love becomes a fragile condition, easily broken, constantly threatened. What was once a space for growth becomes a cage. Expectation is another subtle chain that turns love into suffering. The moment you expect the other person to behave in a certain way, to speak in a certain tone, to love you according to your script, you have already moved away from love. Expectation is the mind's attempt to make love predictable, safe, and comfortable. But love is not meant to be predictable. It is a living energy, constantly changing, constantly revealing new dimensions. When your expectations are not met, and they rarely are, you feel hurt, betrayed, disappointed. But the disappointment does not come from the other person. It comes from the images you created in your own mind. Expectation turns love into a contract, and contracts belong to the world of transactions, not the world of the heart. Possession is perhaps the most destructive transformation of love. The moment you believe someone belongs to you, you begin to take ownership of their time, their emotions, their choices. You start interfering with their freedom, controlling their movements, dictating their boundaries. Possession is rooted in insecurity, the fear that if you do not own someone, they might leave. But the truth is the opposite. The more you try to possess, the more the other longs for escape. Love suffocates under the weight of ownership. What was meant to be a dance becomes a prison. Possession kills the spontaneity, the joy, the aliveness that love requires to thrive. Real love does not cling, because it knows freedom is essential. It does not expect, because it understands that each person is a universe unfolding in their own time. It does not possess, because it recognizes that the beauty of love lies in its voluntary nature. Love becomes suffering only when we force it to obey our fears and demands. When love is allowed to be spacious, fluid, and free, it becomes nourishment for the soul. But when it is chained by the mind, it becomes a source of endless turmoil. The suffering, then, is not in love itself. Love has never hurt anyone. The suffering lies in our attempt to turn love into something it was never meant to be. Healing begins the moment you stop blaming the other and turn inward. As long as your eyes remain fixed on the person who hurt you, as long as your mind repeats the story of what they did or didn't do, you stay trapped in the same emotional loop. Blame may feel comforting for a moment because it gives you a sense of righteousness, a feeling that you were the victim and the other the offender. But this comfort is deceptive. Blame keeps your wounds open. It prevents you from seeing the deeper layers of your own heart. It ties your growth to someone else's behavior, and in doing so, it steals your freedom. True healing does not begin with pointing outward. It begins with looking inward. Turning inward does not mean taking responsibility for someone else's actions or justifying their behavior. It means recognizing that your emotional pain carries messages that cannot be understood as long as you are busy judging the other. When you turn inward, you begin to observe your own reactions, your own expectations, your own patterns in relationships. You begin to notice how much of your suffering is rooted in your own inner landscape, your unspoken fears, your longing for validation, your tendency to depend on others for a sense of worth. The other person may have triggered the pain, but the pain itself belongs to you, and only you can transform it. When you stop blaming, you create a space of honesty. You can finally ask yourself, why did this hurt so deeply? What was I seeking from the other that I wasn't giving to myself? Which old wound from my past did this situation touch? These questions may feel uncomfortable, but they lead you towards self-awareness. And self-awareness is the beginning of healing. Instead of reliving the story of the relationship, you start exploring the story of your inner world. Instead of focusing on what was done to you, you focus on what this moment is trying to teach you. Turning inward also softens the emotional intensity. When your attention is no longer pushing outward in anger or resentment, your energy naturally settles back into your own being. You become calmer, more grounded. You begin to see that the other person was merely a mirror, reflecting something within you that needed attention. Perhaps they reflected your fear of abandonment, your need for control, or your longing for unconditional love. When the mirror is gone, the reflection remains inside you, waiting to be understood. Healing comes from understanding, not from assigning blame. Blame is rooted in the belief that your happiness depends on someone else's behavior. Inward reflection dissolves this belief. It shows you that you have the capacity to heal yourself, to nurture your own emotional wounds, to become emotionally independent. When you look inward, you discover parts of yourself you ignored while you were busy seeking from the outside. You rediscover your inner strength, your inner clarity, your inner resilience. Slowly, the pain becomes less about the person who caused it and more about the transformation it is guiding you toward. When you stop blaming and turn inward, you reclaim your power. You stop waiting for apologies or explanations to feel whole. You stop depending on external closure to move forward. The healing becomes an internal process, something that grows from silence, understanding, and acceptance. In that shift, the wound begins to close, not because time has passed, but because you have finally chosen to meet yourself where you truly are. Every wound in love can become a doorway to awareness, maturity, and inner freedom. When love fails or fractures, the pain feels raw and personal, as if something uniquely tragic has happened to you. Yet hidden within that very pain is a profound opportunity, a chance to see yourself more clearly than ever before. Wounds have a way of stopping your familiar patterns, interrupting your habits, and pulling your attention inward. They take you out of the dream you were living and force you to confront life without the buffer of illusions. What feels like an ending is often the beginning of a deeper understanding. When you are wounded in love, your usual defenses crumble. The ego, which pretends to be strong and self-sufficient, suddenly feels fragile. This vulnerability is not a weakness. It is an opening. It allows you to observe parts of yourself that you normally avoid. Your fears, your insecurities, your dependency on others for approval or affection. The wound becomes a mirror, reflecting everything within you that needs healing or evolution. Without this pain, you might have continued living unconsciously, repeating old patterns and calling them love. But the shock of heartbreak disrupts these patterns and invites you to become aware of the truth beneath them. Awareness begins the moment you stop resisting the wound. When you allow yourself to feel its depth without distraction or denial, you begin to understand how much of your suffering comes from inner narratives rather than outer events. You see the expectations you had placed on the other person, the stories you created about the relationship, the unconscious beliefs you carried from past experiences. This clarity does not come easily. It emerges slowly through reflection, silence, and a willingness to face yourself honestly. The wound teaches you to look inward instead of outward. It guides you back to your own center. As awareness deepens, maturity follows. Maturity in love does not mean becoming distant or cold. It means learning to love without losing yourself. It means seeing the difference between love and attachment, between connection and dependency. The wound shows you where you are clinging, where you are projecting, where you are trying to possess or control. It reveals the parts of you that were seeking completion through someone else. When you recognize these tendencies, they begin to loosen their grip. You no longer demand from love what it cannot give, guarantees, stability, or fixed identities. You begin to relate to others from a place of inner strength rather than inner need. This is the maturity that heartbreak can awaken. Inner freedom is perhaps the greatest gift that comes from a wound in love. When you pass through the pain consciously, you emerge lighter, clearer, less entangled in your own expectations. You see that love cannot be owned or forced. You learn to appreciate the presence of others without clinging to them. You recognize that your happiness is not dependent on anyone's behavior but rooted in your own awareness. This frees you from the fears that once shaped your relationships. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment. The wound, instead of imprisoning you, becomes the key that unlocks a deeper freedom within. What appears to break you is often the very thing that wakes you up. Every wound in love carries within it a hidden doorway, a silent invitation to evolve. You walk through it with openness and honesty. You discover a version of yourself that is more conscious, more mature, and more free than the one you were before love wounded you.